When a manipulative ex took everything she had, he forgot one thing her father left her in the will: a rundown tool barn on a forgotten piece of land. What she found inside wasn't just a second chance. It was the truth that would let her rebuild her entire life. If you know what it's like to have to start over from nothing, hit that subscribe button. We tell the stories for the people who find the strength to fight back. The key felt like a shard of ice in my palm. It was the only thing I had left that was truly mine. Everything else, every piece of furniture, every book, every photograph, was now just a ghost in an apartment that no longer belonged to me. Leo stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, a look on his face that was a practiced mixture of pity and righteousness. It was a look he'd perfected over the last 2 years, the one he used right before he told you that what he was doing was for your own good. He'd said it when he convinced me to quit my job. He'd said it when he suggested we put the lease and all the bills in his name, to simplify things. He'd said it this morning, when he told me to pack a bag and get out. "It's for the best, Maya," he said, his voice smooth and reasonable. The same voice that had once whispered promises in the dark. "You've been so lost since your dad died. You need a clean break, a fresh start." A fresh start. He made it sound like a gift. But I was looking at the life we had built, or rather, the life I had poured myself into while he signed the papers, and I knew it wasn't a gift. It was an eviction, an erasure. He had systematically removed my name from everything until my entire existence in that space was dependent on his goodwill. And today, his goodwill had run out. I didn't argue. There was no fight left in me. The arguments had been happening in slow motion for months. Quiet erosions of my confidence, little digs that left me feeling foolish and small. To fight now would be like yelling at a hurricane. Pointless, and it would only leave me more exhausted. So I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I walked past him, not meeting his eyes, and pulled the door closed behind me. The click of the lock was the sound of my life breaking in two. I stood on the gray pavement of the apartment complex parking lot, the single duffel bag at my feet containing a few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and the worn paperback I'd been reading. The sky was the color of dishwater, low and heavy, threatening a rain that never seemed to come. It was a Tuesday. The world was going on around me, cars pulling out, people heading to work, the distant hum of the city a constant, indifferent roar. For me, time had stopped. I had $43 in my wallet and a phone with a dying battery. I had no job, no car, and now, no home. I was 23 years old, and I had managed to lose everything. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders, making it hard to breathe. I sank down onto the curb, my bag beside me, and just sat there, watching the world move on without me. It was in that moment of absolute stillness, of utter despair, that I remembered the letter. It had come 6 months ago, a thick, cream-colored envelope with the name of a law firm embossed in the corner. It was the final settling of my father's estate. There wasn't much. My dad was a carpenter, a craftsman. He worked with his hands, not with stocks and bonds. He'd left behind a small life insurance policy that had barely covered the funeral costs and his outstanding medical bills. And one other thing. A thing so strange and seemingly useless that Leo and I had laughed about it. "He left you what?" Leo had asked, peering over my shoulder at the legal document. "Lot 7, Northridge Road, containing 1 house, uninhabitable, and 1 barn with contents." He'd snorted. "A shack and a shed full of rusty saws. What are you going to do with that?" At the time, drowning in grief and leaning on Leo for everything, I had agreed. It was nothing. A piece of forgotten land 200 miles away in a part of the state I'd never even seen. The taxes were minimal, paid up for the next year out of the estate, so I'd signed the papers and promptly forgotten all about it. It was a ghost of a place, left by the ghost of a man I felt I'd barely known. My father had been a quiet man, his hands always calloused and stained with wood varnish. He smelled of sawdust and turpentine. After my mom left when I was a kid, he'd raised me with a kind of gentle, clumsy distance. He worked long hours, came home tired, and we'd eat dinner in near silence. I loved him, but I didn't understand him. His silence felt like a wall I could never climb. When he got sick, the wall had gotten higher. He didn't want to talk about it. He just got quieter, smaller, until he disappeared completely, leaving me with a hollow space in my chest and an old barn on a forgotten road. Now, sitting on that curb with nothing else to my name, that forgotten thing was the only thing I had left. The lawyer's card was still in my wallet, tucked behind my expired student ID. Mr. Henderson. I pulled out my phone. 7% battery. I dialed the number. His voice was exactly as I remembered it, dry, calm, like rustling paper. Henderson Law, how may I help you? I explained who I was, my voice cracking a little. I didn't tell him I was sitting on a curb, homeless.
I just asked about the property.
Yes, Miss Evans, Lot 7. It's all in your name, free and clear. As I recall, the house is derelict. The county listed it as condemned, in fact, but the land is yours. And the barn. The barn, I repeated, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. What's in it? The will was specific, he said, and I could hear him shuffling papers. One tool barn and all contents therein. Your father specified it was to be passed to you as is, untouched. He was quite insistent on that point. Untouched. The word hung in the air. Why? What was in a dusty old barn that was so important? Probably just sentimental junk, old tools he couldn't part with. But it was something. It was a place, a roof of a sort. Mr. Henderson, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Is there any way to sell it? There was a pause on the line. You could sell the land, certainly, he said carefully. Given the state of the house, you'd be selling it for the plot value only. It's in a rather rural area, not a high-demand market. After fees and commissions, you might walk away with a few $1,000s. It would take time to find a buyer, of course. Months, perhaps. Months. I didn't have months. I had about 12 hours before I'd be sleeping in a bus station. A few $1,000s sounded like a king's ransom, but the word months was a death sentence. There was only one other option, as insane as it seemed. Where is it exactly? I asked. Can I get there by bus? He gave me the address and the name of the nearest town, a place called Silver Creek. He sounded surprised, but he was professional enough not to ask why I wanted to go. He probably assumed I wanted to see it before listing it. He had no idea I was planning to live in it. After I hung up, my phone died. It didn't matter. I had a destination. I stood up, my legs stiff, and slung the duffel bag over my shoulder. I walked away from the apartment building, away from the ghost of my life with Leo, and didn't look back. I walked the 2 miles to the downtown bus station, the sky finally breaking open and releasing a cold, miserable drizzle. I bought a one-way ticket to a town I'd never heard of, to see a barn my father had left me. It felt less like a plan and more like the last desperate move in a game I had already lost. I didn't know it then, but the game was just beginning. The bus ride was 8 hours of watching the world blur past the grimy window. The city skyline gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to flat, empty farmland, and finally, to the rolling hills and dense forests of the state's northern counties. The landscape grew wilder, more forgotten. The towns we passed through were smaller, the buildings older, with peeling paint and faded signs. With every mile, I felt like I was traveling not just across the state, but back in time. I spent the hours staring out at the gray, rain-slicked roads, my mind a churning mess of regret and fear. I replayed the last 2 years in my head, searching for the exact moment I had given up my power. Was it when I let Leo talk me into draining my small savings account for his can't-miss investment opportunity, which, of course, missed? Was it when I stopped correcting him when he introduced me to his friends as the girl who was figuring things out, a polite euphemism for unemployed and dependent? Or was it earlier, back when my father was sick, and I was so desperate for comfort, so hungry for someone to lean on, that I had mistaken Leo's control for strength? He had seemed so capable, so sure of himself. He managed my grief, telling me what to feel, how to act. He'd isolated me from my few friends, gently, persuasively, telling me they didn't understand what I was going through. He did. Only he did. And like a fool, I had believed him. I had let him become my entire world, and when he kicked me out, it felt like being exiled from the planet. The bus groaned to a halt in Silver Creek just as dusk was settling, painting the wet streets in shades of purple and gray. The town was little more than a single main street with a gas station, a diner, a general store, and a handful of other shuttered storefronts. A single traffic light blinked yellow, its reflection shimmering on the asphalt. 3 other people got off with me. They were greeted by family, hugging under the small awning of the bus stop. In minutes, they were gone, and I was alone, the bus pulling away with a hiss of its air brakes, leaving me in a profound and ringing silence. The air was different here. It smelled of wet pine and wood smoke and cold, clean earth. It was the smell of my father's workshop. The thought came unbidden, a sharp pang of grief that was so intense it almost buckled my knees. I hadn't allowed myself to really think about him, not in a long time. Leo had discouraged it. "You have to move on, Maya," he'd say gently, whenever I'd get quiet or sad. "Dwelling on it won't bring him back." He was right, but his advice had felt less like healing and more like an amputation. He'd wanted me to cut off my past, to cut off the part of me that was my father's daughter. Because that part of me was quiet and sad and complicated. It wasn't the shiny, happy, uncomplicated girl he wanted on his arm. Northridge Road, according to the map on my dead phone I'd glimpsed before it died, was about 3 miles out of town. There were no taxis, no Ubers. There was just me and my bag and the fading light. I started walking. The road wound its way out of the small town and into the woods. The pavement gave way to gravel. The streetlights disappeared, and soon the only light was a sliver of moon peeking through the thick clouds. The trees crowded in on both sides of the road, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for me. Every snap of a twig in the woods sent a jolt of fear through me. I was a city girl. This kind of darkness, this kind of silence was alien. It was alive. I thought about turning back, sleeping on a bench in the deserted town, but the thought of the barn pulled me forward. It was a destination. It was the only thing I had. After what felt like an eternity, I saw a rusted, leaning mailbox half swallowed by overgrown bushes. In faded, peeling letters, I could just make out the name, Evans. This was it. A narrow dirt track, more of a suggestion of a path than a real driveway, led into the trees. I pushed my way through wet ferns and low-hanging branches, the darkness absolute under the canopy of leaves. And then the trees opened up into a clearing, and I saw it. The house was worse than I could have imagined. It was a skeleton. The roof had caved in on one side, windows were shattered, and the porch sagged at a drunken angle. It looked like it had been abandoned for a century, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. It was a husk, a monument to decay. But behind it, set back a little deeper in the clearing, was the barn. It was big, much bigger than I'd pictured. It was made of dark, weathered wood, the kind that turns a silvery gray with age. It was old, for sure, but it looked solid. Its roofline was straight and strong, its big sliding doors firmly closed. Unlike the house, which looked like it had given up, the barn looked like it was waiting. It had a presence. It felt steadfast. I walked toward it, my boots sinking into the soft, damp earth. The air grew colder as I got closer. There was a large, formidable-looking padlock on the doors. I rummaged in my pocket for the key Mr. Henderson had mailed me after the will was settled. It was old and heavy, made of iron. It looked like something out of a fairy tale. I pushed the key into the lock. It was stiff with rust, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought it wouldn't turn. I put my other hand on it, using all my strength, all my desperation, and twisted. There was a loud, grating groan, and then a solid, satisfying click. The lock sprang open. I pulled it off, the metal cold and heavy in my hand. The doors were massive. I found a handle and pulled. It didn't budge. I put my shoulder into it, digging my heels into the mud, and pushed. With a deep, groaning shudder that seemed to come from the earth itself, the door scraped open a few feet, just enough for me to slip through. I stepped inside and was plunged into a darkness that was even more profound than the woods. The air was thick and still, heavy with the layered smells of old wood, oil, metal, and something else. Something that smelled like time itself. I fumbled for my bag, my hands shaking, and pulled out the small flashlight on my keychain. It was a weak, pathetic little thing, but when I switched it on, its pale beam cut a slice through the oppressive dark. And I saw what my father had left me. The barn was cavernous, its high, vaulted ceiling was lost in the shadows above. The flashlight beam danced across stacks of lumber, neatly organized by size and type. There were workbenches lining the walls, covered in a thick blanket of dust, but still orderly. Tools hung from pegs on the walls, saws and hammers, chisels and planes, each in its proper place, silhouetted in the gloom like ancient artifacts in a tomb. A massive table saw stood in the center of the room, draped in a canvas cloth. It was a craftsman's sanctuary. It was my father's soul made visible. It was dusty, it was cold, but it wasn't chaotic. It was a place of order, of purpose. Even in its long slumber, it retained the echo of the man who had worked here. I walked deeper inside, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the vast space. I ran my hand along a workbench, leaving a clean streak in the thick dust. Underneath, the wood was smooth and worn. I could almost feel the phantom impression of his hands, working day after day, year after year. Why had he never told me about this place? He'd always worked out of a rented space in the city. This barn, this land, it was a secret. A whole secret life I knew nothing about. In the back corner, I found a small cot, a sleeping bag rolled up neatly at its foot. Beside it was a small camping stove and a stack of canned food, all of it years past its expiration date. There was a wood-burning stove in the corner, a pile of split logs stacked beside it. It seemed he had stayed here, maybe worked here on weekends. He had lived a life here I couldn't even imagine. It was overwhelming. The grief I had suppressed for so long came rushing back, a tidal wave of sorrow and confusion. I sank down onto the dusty floor, my back against a stack of sweet-smelling cedar planks, and I finally let myself cry. I cried for my father, the stranger who had left me this strange inheritance. I cried for my mother, who had disappeared from my life and left him to raise me alone. I cried for myself, for the foolish, trusting girl I had been, the girl who had let Leo dismantle her life piece by piece. And I cried for the terrifying, uncertain future that stretched out before me in the darkness of this barn. I cried until I had nothing left. I must have fallen asleep right there on the floor, because the next thing I knew, I was blinking against a thin ray of gray morning light slanting through a gap in the barn wall. My body was stiff and cold, but my head felt clearer than it had in years. The storm of emotion had passed, leaving behind a quiet, fragile calm. I was here. I had survived the night. Now I had to figure out what to do next. I spent the morning exploring, getting my bearings. The first order of business was survival. I found a rain barrel outside, full of clean, cold water. I washed my face in it, the shock of the cold a welcome jolt. I checked the canned food. Most of it was bad, but I found a few cans of beans and soup that seemed okay. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The wood stove looked functional. With a bit of luck, I could get a fire going before nightfall. The place was a fortress of forgotten things. I started going through the workbenches, opening drawers, peering into old coffee cans full of nuts and bolts. It was a museum of my father's life's work. Finely crafted dovetail joints in a scrap piece of cherry wood. Sketches of furniture designs on yellowed graph paper. A half-finished rocking horse, its wood sanded smooth as silk, waiting for a final coat of varnish. With each discovery, a picture of my father began to form that was richer and more complex than the quiet, distant man I remembered. He wasn't just a carpenter, he was an artist. His love, his passion, was right here, in the grain of the wood, in the precision of his work. Maybe he wasn't silent because he had nothing to say. Maybe he just spoke a different language, a language of wood and steel and sawdust. It was in the third workbench, tucked away at the very back of a deep drawer, that I found it. It was a small, flat metal box, the kind people used for cash or important papers. It was locked with a simple key lock, and it was heavy. I shook it. No rattle. Whatever was inside was packed in tight. My heart started to beat a little faster. This felt different from the tools and the sketches. This felt intentional. There was no key in the drawer. I spent the next hour searching the entire barn, my initial calm giving way to a frantic, obsessive energy. I checked every drawer, every can, every pocket of the old work coats hanging on a hook by the door. Nothing. The frustration was maddening. It was right there, a locked secret, and I couldn't get in. I sat on an old stool, staring at the box, my mind racing. What would my dad do? The answer was obvious. He was a man of tools. He wouldn't search for a key. He would find a way to open it. I looked at the walls around me, at the rows of implements. I grabbed a small crowbar and a hammer. I wedged the tip of the crowbar into the seam of the box's lid. I tapped it gently with the hammer, then harder. The metal was stubborn. I repositioned the crowbar and put my weight into it. The metal lid groaned in protest, then bent with a sharp pop. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. The lock was broken. My hands were trembling as I lifted the deformed lid. Inside, there was no money, no precious jewels. It was filled with letters, dozens of them, bundled together with twine, all addressed to me in my father's neat, blocky handwriting. On top of the stack was a single, thicker envelope with my name, Maya, written on the front. I lifted it out. It was sealed. My fingers felt clumsy and numb as I tore it open. Inside was a letter, several pages long, and a key. Not an old iron key like the one for the barn, but a small, modern one. A key for a safety deposit box. I unfolded the letter and began to read. "My dearest Maya," it began. The words looked so strange, so formal in his handwriting. He'd never called me his dearest anything. He'd called me kiddo. If you are reading this, it means I am gone. And it means you have found your way here, to this place. I am sorry for so many things. I am sorry for the silence. I know you thought I didn't care, that I was distant. The truth is, I was terrified. I was terrified of failing you, the way I failed your mother. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had to stop and take a deep breath before I could continue. When your mother left, she didn't just walk out on us. She left behind a mountain of debt. She was a gambler, Maya. Not in a way anyone could see. It was all online, hidden. By the time I found out, we were ruined. We were about to lose the house, everything. I made a deal to keep you safe. I took on all of it, every last penny, in exchange for her walking away and never coming back. I didn't want you to grow up with that chaos, with that instability. And I didn't want you to hate her. So I let you think she just left. It was easier. I read the paragraph again, and then a third time. My mother, a gambler. The story I had told myself my whole life, that she had just fallen out of love with him, with us, crumbled into dust. It wasn't abandonment, it was a rescue. My father had bought my safety, my stability, at the cost of his own reputation in my eyes. He had chosen to be the silent, stoic father, letting me believe whatever I wanted, rather than poison my memory of my mother. The letter went on. I worked every hour God sent to pay it down. The rental for the workshop in the city, the mortgage, all of it. This place, this land, was the only thing they couldn't touch. I inherited it from my own father. I kept it secret. It was my escape, but it was also my insurance policy. It was for you, a place to fall if you ever needed it. I saved every spare dollar I could, Maya. It wasn't much, but I put it away for you. For your future. A future I was so afraid I wouldn't get to see. My vision was blurry with tears. The quiet, distant man was gone, replaced by a warrior who had fought a silent, lonely battle for me his entire life. Every long hour he worked, every tired dinner we ate in silence. It wasn't because he didn't want to be with me. It was because he was trying to build a wall around me, to protect me from a danger I never even knew existed. The guilt was a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. All those years I had resented his silence. I had mistaken his exhaustion for indifference. I had been so wrong. There is one more thing you need to know, the letter continued, and the tone shifted. It became harder, more urgent. I met that boy you're with, Leo. I only met him a few times, before I got too sick. I didn't like him. He has a wolf's smile. He looks at you not like you're a person, but like you're a thing he can own. Men like that, they don't love. They conquer. They will take and take until you have nothing left, and then they will tell you it was your fault for being so empty. I tried to warn you, but the words wouldn't come out right. And you were so happy. I didn't want to take that away from you, but I made a contingency plan, just in case. I had to put the letter down. My hands were shaking so badly, I couldn't hold it steady. A wolf's smile. My father, who barely spoke 2 words to Leo, had seen him with perfect, terrifying clarity. He had seen the predator I had mistaken for a prince. He had seen the end of the story before it had even begun, and he had prepared for it. Listen, if you've made it this far, this story is probably hitting you in a real way. Have you ever discovered a truth about your family, about your past, that changed absolutely everything you thought you knew? It's a feeling like the ground falling out from under your feet. Let me know in the comments if you've ever felt that. This community is a place where we can share those stories, because you are not alone in this. Now let's get back to what my father's letter said next. It changed everything. I picked the letter back up, my heart pounding against my ribs. The key in this envelope is for a safety deposit box at the Silver Creek Community Bank. In that box is a sum of money, everything I managed to save. It's not a fortune, but it should be enough for a real fresh start. But there's something else in there too. It's information. When I got suspicious of Leo, I did some digging. A man who works with his hands learns to see the details other people miss. I hired a private investigator with the last of my savings, a good one. He found things. Leo isn't just a charming talker, Maya. He's a con artist. The investment opportunity he's probably already pitched you on? The one that sounds too good to be true? It is. He's done it before. He finds women who are vulnerable, who have a little money or a recent inheritance, and he bleeds them dry. The file in that box has the proof. Names, dates, police reports that were filed and then dropped when the women were too ashamed or too scared to press charges. It's all there. I felt the air leave my lungs. The investment, the one that had drained my small savings account, the one he'd been so convincing about, showing me charts and projections he'd printed off the internet. It had all been a lie, a script, a practiced performance he had given before. I wasn't just a breakup, I was a mark, a victim in a long line of victims. The shame I'd felt on the curb outside the apartment was nothing compared to this. This was a deeper humiliation, a violation that went to the very core of my identity. I had prided myself on being smart, on being a good judge of character. But he had played me so perfectly, so completely. He had used my grief for my father as a tool to pry open my life and steal it. And my father, even from the edge of the grave, had been trying to protect me. The letter concluded, "I don't know what your situation is right now, but I'm guessing it's not good if you've come all the way out here. What you do with this information is your choice. You can take the money and disappear. Start over somewhere new where he can never find you. There is no shame in that. Your safety is the most important thing. Or you can use it to fight. You can use it to make sure he never does this to another woman again. That choice is harder. It's dangerous. But I raised you to be strong, Maya. Stronger than you know. Whatever you choose, know this. I have always been proud of you. I have always loved you. I'm just sorry I was so bad at saying it. Love, Dad." I sat there in the dusty silence of the barn, the letter in my lap, and the world tilted on its axis. Everything I thought was true was false, and everything I thought was false was true. My father wasn't distant. He was a guardian. My mother wasn't cruel. She was sick. My relationship with Leo wasn't a failure of love. It was a successful con. For a long time, I didn't move. I just sat there, absorbing the shock, letting the truth rearrange the furniture in my mind. The sun moved across the sky, its pale light shifting through the gaps in the barn walls. I felt a rage building in me that was cold and clean and pure. It wasn't the hot, messy anger I'd felt before. This was different. This was a focused, clarifying fury. Leo hadn't just broken my heart and taken my money. He had preyed on my grief. He had used the memory of my father as a weapon against me. He had underestimated me. He had underestimated my father. He had forgotten about the barn. And that was going to be the biggest mistake of his life. The choice my father laid out was clear: run or fight. The old Maya, the one who had walked away from the apartment without a word, would have run. She would have taken the money and built a small, quiet life somewhere, always looking over her shoulder. But the old Maya was gone. She had died on the curb yesterday. The woman sitting in this barn, holding her father's last words, was someone new. Someone forged in betrayal and loss, but also in the sudden, shocking revelation of a love so fierce it had reached across death to save her. I wasn't going to run. I was going to burn his whole world to the ground. The next morning, I walked the 3 miles back into Silver Creek. The walk felt different this time. The woods weren't menacing, they were peaceful. The silence wasn't empty, it was calming. I wasn't running from something anymore. I was walking toward a fight. The Silver Creek Community Bank was a small, solid brick building on Main Street. It looked like it had been there for 100 years. I walked in, my heart hammering, and presented the key and a copy of my father's death certificate and my ID to the woman at the front desk. She led me back to the vault, a massive, circular steel door that looked like something out of a movie. She used her key, I used mine, and a long, thin metal box slid out. She handed it to me and showed me to a small, private viewing room. The room was silent, furnished with only a table and a chair. I sat down and opened the box. On top was a stack of cash, held together with rubber bands. It was all $100 bills. I didn't count it then, but it looked like a life-changing amount of money. Underneath the cash was a thick manila folder. I opened it. The private investigator's report was clipped to the inside. It was methodical, professional, and damning. There were names of at least 3 other women, transcripts of interviews, copies of bank statements showing large transfers of money into Leo's accounts, followed by the accounts being closed. There was a copy of a restraining order one woman had filed against him in another state 2 years ago. It was all there. My father had given me a sword. I put everything back in the box except for a few $100s which I tucked into my pocket. I walked out of the bank and went to the general store. I bought a new phone, a charger, a sleeping bag, a propane canister for the camp stove, and a bag full of non-perishable food. Real food. Coffee, pasta, canned stew. I felt a thrill of independence spending that money. It was mine. I had earned it through inheritance, yes, but it felt like I was earning it again. By choosing to stay, by choosing to be my father's daughter. Back at the barn, I spent the afternoon making the place habitable. I swept away the thickest layers of dust. I cleaned out the wood stove and, after a few clumsy attempts, got a small, cheerful fire going. The warmth pushed back the damp chill and made the huge space feel less like a tomb and more like a shelter. As the fire crackled, I sat and made a plan. I called Mr. Henderson. I told him everything. I told him about Leo, about the evidence, about the money. He was silent for a long time after I finished. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its dry, papery quality. It was firm, and there was a note of something like admiration in it. "Your father was a very smart man, Ms. Evans," he said. "What Leo did to you is a crime. It's called financial abuse, and with this evidence, we have a very strong case. Not just to recover your money, but to see him face criminal charges." He laid out the next steps. We would file a police report. We would file a civil suit. He would connect me with a prosecutor who specialized in these kinds of fraud cases. "But Maya," he said, his voice softening, "your father was also right. This will be a difficult road. Leo will fight back. He will try to paint you as unstable, as a liar. Are you prepared for that?" I looked around the barn, at the tools on the wall, at the sturdy beams overhead, at the warm glow of the fire. This place was built to last. It was built by a man who knew how to weather a storm. "Yes," I said, and my voice didn't waver. "I am." The next few months were a blur of activity. I gave my statement to the police. I met with the prosecutor, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who looked at the file my father had assembled, and her eyes lit up with a predator's glee. "We've got him," she'd said. "This is the kind of evidence we dream of." Leo was served. His reaction was predictable. He called me, alternating between threats and tearful apologies. He told me I was ruining his life. He told me he loved me. He told me I was a pathetic, vengeful psycho. I listened to his voice, the same voice that had once held so much power over me, and I felt nothing. It was like listening to a radio station from a distant country, speaking a language I no longer understood. I hung up and blocked his number. I used some of the money to hire a local handyman, a grizzled old man named George with hands as calloused as my father's. He helped me get the water pump working, so I had running water in the barn from the well. He showed me how to patch the few small leaks in the barn roof. He never asked about my past or why I was living in a barn. He just seemed to accept it. "Your dad built this place, right?" he said one day, slapping one of the main support beams. "Good bones. You can build a life in a place with good bones." He was right. I started to build. I cleaned and organized the entire barn, turning it from a dusty storage space into a functional workshop and a simple, rustic home. I found I had a knack for it. I learned the names of the tools, how they felt in my hand. I started with small projects, fixing a broken chair, building a bookshelf. I found a deep, quiet satisfaction in the work. In taking something broken and making it whole. In taking raw materials and creating something new. I was sanding the top of a small table I was building when I saw the car pull up. It was a sleek, black sedan that looked completely out of place on the muddy track. A man in an expensive suit got out. He looked nervous, out of his element. He was Leo's lawyer. He offered me a deal. Leo would pay back my money, plus a generous amount for my pain and suffering, if I would drop the charges and sign a non-disclosure agreement. "He just wants to put this unfortunate misunderstanding behind him," the lawyer said, smiling a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I looked at his polished shoes, sinking slightly into the mud. I thought about the other women in the file. I thought about the next girl Leo would find, the next vulnerable person whose life he would try to destroy. I wiped my dusty hands on my jeans. "Tell your client," I said, my voice even and calm, "that I'm not interested in his money. I'm interested in justice." The look on his face, a mixture of shock and disbelief, was more satisfying than any check could ever have been. He sputtered for a moment, then got back in his car and drove away. I turned back to my table and kept sanding, the rhythmic motion a kind of meditation. I was building something that was mine. It wasn't just a table. It was a life. 6 months later, I stood in a courtroom. I wore a simple black dress, and I stood tall. When I told my story, I didn't cry. I spoke clearly and factually. I presented the evidence my father had gathered. I looked at Leo, sitting at the defendant's table. He looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of his charm and his confidence. He just looked like a cheap con man in an ill-fitting suit. He was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud and larceny. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison. As they led him away, he looked at me, his eyes filled with a pathetic, impotent rage. I felt no triumph, no joy, just a quiet, profound sense of peace. It was over. The ghost that had haunted me was finally gone. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright sunshine, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely and utterly free. I drove back to the barn, not in a bus this time, but in an old, reliable pickup truck I'd bought with some of the money. As I pulled into the clearing, the barn stood there, strong and solid against the blue sky. It looked like a home. It was my home. In the year that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. The legal battles were over, but the work of building a life was just beginning. I used the rest of my father's money not as a cushion to sit on, but as a foundation to build from. I invested in new tools for the workshop. I started a small business, crafting custom furniture. My work carried the echo of my father's artistry, but with my own style, my own voice. The local community in Silver Creek, initially wary of the strange young woman who lived in a barn, slowly began to embrace me. George, the handyman, introduced me to the owner of the local lumberyard. The woman who ran the diner started saving me a corner booth. They were small connections, but they felt more real, more solid than any of the friendships I'd had in the city, friendships that had been filtered through Leo. One day, I decided to tackle the derelict house. It was too far gone to save, but it was an eyesore, a constant reminder of decay. I hired a local crew to help me demolish it. We salvaged what we could, old floorboards, a few intact windows, and we tore the rest down. Clearing the wreckage felt like clearing the last vestiges of the past. In its place, I started a garden. I tilled the soil, planted seeds, and watched as new life began to push its way up through the dark earth. I never touched the other letters in the metal box, the ones my father had written to me over the years. I knew they were there, a chronicle of his silent love and his secret fears. For now, it was enough to know they existed. Maybe one day I would be ready to read them, but for now, I wanted to focus on the future, not the past. His final letter had given me everything I needed: the truth, a choice, and the freedom to become myself. My inheritance wasn't the money in the safety deposit box. It wasn't even the barn or the land. It was the discovery of my own resilience. It was the strength I found in a place everyone else had written off as worthless. My father had left me a pile of old tools, a dusty shelter, and a legacy of quiet strength. He had given me the chance to build my own life, with my own 2 hands. And that was a gift more precious than gold. Sometimes in the evenings, I sit on the porch I built on the side of the barn, a cup of coffee in my hands, and I watch the sun set over the trees. The air smells of sawdust and pine and the damp earth of my garden. It's a quiet life, a simple life, but it's my life. It's a life built on a foundation of truth, a life earned through a difficult fight. It's a life that honors the man who worked in this barn before me, the man who taught me, in his own silent way, that the strongest things are built to last. He taught me that a home isn't just four walls and a roof. It's a place you can be safe. It's a place you can be free. It's a place you can heal. My father didn't leave me a fortune. He left me a choice. He left me a second chance, hidden in a place no one else valued. What we inherit isn't always about money. Sometimes it's the strength to build our own home, to reclaim our own story. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had to find your own strength in the ruins of your life, please subscribe and share your own story of rebuilding in the comments below. I promise you, I read every single one. Because we all have a story worth telling. We just need to find the courage to pick up the tools and start building.